Graham Greene, Brother, audio story. The communists were the first to appear. They walked quickly, a group about a dozen, up the boulevard which runs from Combat to Menilmontant. A young man and a girl lagged a little way behind because the man's leg was hopeless, as if they were trying to catch a train which they knew already in their hearts they were too late to catch. The proprietor of the cafe saw them coming when they were still a long way off. The lamps at that time were still alight. It was later that the bullets broke the bulbs and dropped darkness all over the quarter of Paris, and the group showed up plainly in the wide barren boulevard. Since sunset only one customer had entered the cafe, and very soon after sunset firing could be heard from the direction of Combat. The metro station had closed hours ago. And yet something obstinate and undefeatable in the proprietor's character prevented him from putting up the shutters. It might have been avarice. He could not himself have thought what it was as he pressed his broad yellow forehead against the glass and stared this way and that up the boulevard and down the boulevard. But when he saw the group and their air of hurry, he began immediately to close his cafe. First he went and warned his only customer, who was practicing billiard shots, walking round and round the table, throwing and stroking a thin moustache between shots, a little green in the face under the low diffused lights. "The rats are coming," the proprietor said. "You'd better be off. I'm putting up the shutters." "Don't interrupt. They won't harm me," the customer said. "This is a tricky shot. Rats in bulk. Off the cushion. Screw on spot." He shot his ball straight into a pocket. "I knew you couldn't do anything with that," the proprietor said, nodding his bald head. "You might just as well go home. Give me a hand with the shutters first. I've sent my wife away." The customer turned on him maliciously, rattling the cue between his fingers. "It was your talking that spoiled the shot. You caused to be frightened. I dare say. But I'm a poor man. I'm safe. I'm not going to stir." He went across to his coat and took out a dry cigar. "Bring me a bock." He walked round the table on his toes and the balls clicked, and the proprietor padded back into the bar, elderly and irritated. He did not fetch the beer but began to close the shutters. Every move he made was slow and clumsy. Long before he had finished, the group of communists was outside. He stopped what he was doing and watched them with furtive dislike. He was afraid that the rattle of the shutters would attract their attention. "If I'm very quiet and still," he thought, "they may go on," and he remembered with malicious pleasure the police barricade across the Place de la République. "That will finish them. In the meanwhile, I must be very quiet, very still," and he felt a kind of warm satisfaction at the idea that worldly wisdom dictated the very attitude most suited to his nature. So he stared through the edge of a shutter, yellow, plump, cautious, hearing the billiard balls crackle in the other room, seeing the young man come climbing up the pavement on the girl's arm, watching them stand and stare with dubious faces up the boulevard towards Combat. But when they came into the cafe, he was already behind the bar, smiling and bowing and missing nothing, noticing how they had divided forces, how 6 of them had begun to run back the way they had come. The young man sat down in a dark corner above the cellar stairs, and the others stood around the door waiting for something to happen. It gave the proprietor an odd feeling that they should stand there in his cafe not asking for a drink, knowing what to expect when he, the owner, knew nothing, understood nothing. At last the girl said, "Cognac," leaving the others and coming to the bar. But when he had put it out for her, very careful to give a fair and not too generous measure, she simply took it to the man sitting in the dark and held it to his mouth. "3 francs," the proprietor said. She took the glass and sipped a little and turned it so that the man's lips might touch the same spot. Then she knelt down and rested her forehead against the man's forehead, and so they stayed. 3 francs, the proprietor said, but he could not make his voice bold. The man was no longer visible in his corner, only the girl's back, thin and shabby in a black cotton frock, as she knelt, leaning forward to find the man's face. The proprietor was downed by the 4 men at the door, by the knowledge they were rats, who had no respect for private property, who would drink his wine and go away without paying, who would rape his woman, but there was only his wife and she was not there, who would rob his bank, who would murder him as soon as look at him. So, with fear in his heart, he gave up the 3 francs as lost rather than attract any more attention. Then the worst that he contemplated happened. One of the men at the door came up to the bar and told him to pour out 4 glasses of cognac. Yes, yes, the proprietor said, fumbling with the cork, praying secretly to the Virgin to send an angel, to send the police, to send the guard-mobile. Now, immediately, before the cork came out. That will be 12 francs. Oh no, the man said. We're all comrades here. Share and share alike. Listen, he said, with earnest mockery, leaning across the bar. All we have is yours just as much, it's ours, comrade. And stepping back a pace, he presented himself to the proprietor, so that he might take his choice of stringy tie, of threadbare trousers, of starved features. And it follows from that, comrade, that all you have is ours. So, 4 cognacs. Share and share alike. Of course, the proprietor said. I was only joking. Then he stood with bottle poised and the 4 glasses tingled upon the counter. A machine gun, he said, up by combat, and smiled to see how for the moment the men forgot their brandy as they fidgeted near the door. Very soon now, he thought, and I shall be quit of them. A machine gun, the rat said incredulously. They're using machine guns? Well, the proprietor said, encouraged by this scene that the guard-mobile were not very far away. You can't pretend that you aren't armed yourselves. He leaned across the bar in a way that was almost paternal. After all, you know, your ideas, they wouldn't do in France. Free love. Who is talking about free love? The rat said. The proprietor shrugged and smiled and nodded at the corner. The girl knelt with her head on the man's shoulder, her back to the room. They were quite silent and the glass of brandy stood on the floor beside them. The girl's beret was pushed back on her head and one stocking was slattered and darned from knee to ankle. What? Those two? They aren't lovers. I, the proprietor said, with my bourgeois notions would have thought, he is her brother, the rat said. The men came clustering round the bar and laughed at him, but softly, as if a sleeper or a sick person were in the house. All the time they were listening for something. Between their shoulders the proprietor could look out across the boulevard. He could see the corner of the Faubourg du Temple. What are you waiting for? For friends? The rat said. He made a gesture with open palm as if to say, you see, we share and share alike. We have no secrets. Something moved at the corner of the Faubourg du Temple. 4 more cognacs, the rat said. What about those two? The proprietor asked. Leave them alone. They look after themselves. They are tired. How tired they were. No walk up the boulevard from Ménilmontant could explain the tiredness. They seemed to have come farther and fared a great deal worse than their companions. They were more starved. They were infinitely more hopeless, sitting in their dark corner away from the friendly gossip, the amicable desperate voices which now confused the proprietor's brain, until for a moment he believed himself to be a host entertaining friends. He laughed and made a broad joke directed at the two of them, but they made no sign of understanding. Perhaps they were to be pitied, cut off from the camaraderie round the counter. Perhaps they were to be envied for their deeper comradeship. The proprietor thought for no reason at all of the bar great trees of the Tuileries like a series of exclamation marks drawn against the winter sky. Puzzled, disintegrated, with all his bearings lost, he started out through the door towards the faubourg. It was as if they had not seen each other for a long while and would soon again be saying goodbye. Hardly aware of what he was doing, he filled the 4 glasses with brandy. They stretched out worn, blunted fingers for them. "Wait," he said, "I've got something better than this." Then paused, conscious of what was happening across the boulevard. The lamplight splashed down on the blue steel helmets. The guard-mobile were lining out across the entrance to the faubourg, and a machine gun pointed directly at the cafe windows. So, the proprietor thought, my prayers are answered. Now I must do my part, not look, not warn them, save myself. Have they covered the side door? I will get the other bottle. Real Napoleon brandy. Share, and share alike. He felt a curious lack of triumph as he opened the trapdoor of the bar and came out. He tried not to walk quickly back towards the billiard room. Nothing that he did must warn this man. He tried to spare himself with the thought that every slow casual step he took was a blow for France, for his cafe, for his savings. He had to step over the girl's feet to pass her. She was asleep. He noted the sharp shoulder blades thrusting through the cotton and raised his eyes and met her brother's, filled with pain and despair. He stopped. He found he could not pass without a word. It was as if he needed to explain something, as if he belonged to the wrong party. With false bonhomie he waved the corkscrew he carried in the other's face. Another cognac, eh? It's no good talking to them, the rat said. They're German. They don't understand a word. German? That's what's wrong with his leg. A concentration camp. The proprietor told himself that he must be quick, that he must put a door between him and them, that the end was very close. But he was bewildered by the hopelessness in the man's gaze. What's he doing here? Nobody answered him. It was as if his question were too foolish to need a reply. With his head sunk upon his breast, the proprietor went past, and the girl slept on. He was like a stranger leaving a room where all the rest are friends. A German? They don't understand a word, and up through the heavy darkness of his mind, through the avarice and the dubious triumph, a few German words remembered from very old days climbed like spies into the light. A line from the Lorelei, learned in school, Kamerad, with its wartime suggestion of fear and surrender, and oddly from nowhere, the phrase, Mein Bruder. He opened the door of the billiard room and closed behind him and softly turned the key. Spot in bulk, the customer explained and leaned across the great green table. But while he took aim, wrinkling his narrow peevish eyes, the firing started. It came into bursts with a rip of glass between. The girl cried out something, but it was not one of the words he knew. Then feet ran across the floor, the trap of the bar slumped. The proprietor sat back against the table and listened for any further sound, but silence came in under the door and silence through the keyhole. The claws! My God, the claws! The customer said, and the proprietor looked down at his own hand, which was working on the corkscrew into the table. Will this absurdity ever end? The customer said. I shall go home. Wait, the proprietor said. Wait. He was listening to voices and footsteps in the other room. These were voices he did not recognize. Then a car drove up and presently drove away again. Somebody rattled the handle of the door. Who is it? The proprietor called. Who are you? Open the door. Ah, customer said with relief. The police. Where was I now? Spot in bulk. He began to chalk his cue. The proprietor opened the door. Yes, the guard-mobile had arrived. He was safe again, though his windows were smashed. The rats had vanished as if they had never been. He looked at the raised trap, at the smashed electric bulbs, at the broken bottle which dripped behind the bar. The cafe was full of men. and he remembered with odd relief that he had not had time to lock the side door. "Are you the owner?" the officer asked. "A bock for each of these men and a cognac for myself. Be quick about it." The proprietor calculated 9 francs 50 and watched closely with bent head the coins rattle down upon the counter. "You see," the officer said with significance, "we pay." He nodded towards the side door. "Those others, did they pay?" "No," the proprietor admitted. They had not paid, but as he counted the coins and slipped them into the till, he caught himself silently repeating the officer's order. A bock for each of these men. Those others, he thought, once got to say that for them. They weren't mean about the drink. It was for cognacs with them, but of course they did not pay. "And my windows?" he complained about with sudden asperity. "What about my windows?" "Never you mind," the officer said. "The government will pay. You have only to send in your bill. Hurry up now with my cognac. I have no time for gossip." "You can see for yourself," the proprietor said, "how the bottles have been broken. Who will pay for that?" "Everything will be paid for," the officer said. "And now I must go to the cellar to fetch more?" He was angry at the reiteration of the word pay. "They enter my cafe," he thought. "They smash my windows. They order me about, and think that all is well if they pay, pay, pay." It occurred to him that these men were intruders. "Step to it," the officer said, and turned and rebuked one of the men who had leaned his rifle against the bar. At the top of the cellar stairs the proprietor stopped. They were in darkness, but by the light from the bar he could just make out a body halfway down. He began to tremble violently, and it was some seconds before he could strike a match. The young German lay head downwards, and the blood from his head had dropped onto the step below. His eyes were open and stared back at proprietor with the old despairing expression of life. The proprietor could not believe that he was dead. "Kamerad," he said, bending down, while the match singed his fingers and went out, trying to recall some phrase in German, but he could only remember, as he bent lower still, "Mein Bruder." Then suddenly he turned and ran up the steps, waved the matchbox in the officer's face, and called out in a low hysterical voice to him and his men and to the customer stooping under the low green shade, "Cochon! Cochon!" "What was that? What was that?" the officer exclaimed. "Did you say that he was your brother? It's impossible." And he frowned incredulously at the proprietor and rattled the coins in his pocket.